Before we begin, a quick note. Everything in this video is political opinion and commentary based on publicly available reporting. Some scenarios are speculative analysis, not confirmed events. We present multiple perspectives. Now, let's talk.
Picture this. A man walks into the most powerful office on the planet. Behind him, the weight of 330 million lives. In front of him, a desk where every single decision he makes will echo through markets, through families, through history itself. He has made a promise. 4 words, simple, electric, make America great again. Now, analysts, economists, foreign policy experts, and historians are asking a question that is making headlines around the world. Did a series of critical decisions take America further from greatness rather than closer to it? Today, we examine 7 of those decisions, not to attack, not to defend, but to understand, honestly, deeply, and with full respect for the complexity of leadership. And here's what I want to know from you right now, wherever you are watching from. Which country are you in? Drop it in the comments. Has a leader in your country ever made a decision you thought was a costly mistake? Tell me, this conversation belongs to all of us. Welcome to Capture Smart. This channel exists for one reason, to take the biggest, most complex stories shaping our world and tell them in a way that is honest, human, and genuinely worth your time. Political analysis, real-life lessons, stories that make you think long after the video ends. If you are new here, subscribe right now and hit that bell, because I promise you the stories we tell here are ones you will not find told this way anywhere else. And for those of you who are already part of this community, thank you. You make this worth doing every single week. All right, come, let us begin. Stay until the very end, because the 7th decision is the one that most commentators are completely missing, and it might be the most important of all.
Before we look at decisions made in Washington in 2025 and 2026, let us travel back, much further back, to understand a pattern that history repeats, again and again, regardless of century or civilization. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius ruled at the peak of Roman power in the 2nd century AD. He was a soldier, a philosopher, and a statesman. In his private journals, the Meditations, never intended for public eyes, he wrote something remarkable. He said that the true measure of leadership is not the battles you win, it is the crises you prevent, the wars you are wise enough not to start. Later came the Great Ottoman Sultanate. At its height, the Ottomans controlled territory stretching across 3 continents. And historians note that the sultans who expanded the empire most sustainably were not those who fought the most wars, but those who mastered the art of strategic restraint, who knew when to press forward and when stepping back was the stronger move. Power, history teaches us, is not just about what you do with strength. It is about what you choose not to do and why. Today, in 2026, these ancient lessons feel extraordinarily relevant because America, the most powerful nation in modern human history, is facing questions that empires have always faced eventually. And the decisions made in recent months are being examined under a historical microscope. Let us look at 7 of them. Decision 1. The diplomacy road not taken and the legacy that could have been. In the world of geopolitics, timing is everything. And according to multiple foreign policy analysts, there was a window, a genuine, historically rare window that presented itself in late 2024 and early 2025. Iran, analysts note, was in a weakened position. Its regional proxy networks had been under sustained pressure. Its domestic economy was struggling under the weight of years of international sanctions. And critically, diplomatic back channels, according to reporting from several credible outlets, were reportedly open. Foreign policy experts at institutions like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Brookings Institution have written extensively about this period. Their assessment: the conditions for a genuine diplomatic breakthrough were, arguably, better than they had been in decades. Now, here is where this analysis becomes genuinely fascinating. Think about Donald Trump's brand. His entire political identity was built around the idea that he was the ultimate deal-maker, the man who could walk into a room that every other politician had failed in and come out with a handshake. What if that deal-making energy had been directed at Iran during that diplomatic window? Not a perfect deal, not an ideal outcome, but a real negotiated de-escalation, a framework that reduced nuclear risk, opened limited economic exchange, and began a cautious process of normalization. Analysts have noted plainly, a president who achieved even a partial breakthrough with Iran, America's most persistent geopolitical challenge, would have created a legacy that transcends party lines. The Nobel Peace Prize Committee in Oslo has historically recognized exactly this kind of audacious diplomatic achievement. Instead, the decision, according to publicly available reporting, leaned toward military and political confrontation rather than negotiation. And with that choice, something significant was left on the table. Pause here for a second. Do you believe real diplomacy with Iran was ever possible, or is the conflict too deep? I genuinely want to hear your take. Drop it in the comments right now. Decision 2. The humanitarian question: accountability, complexity, and American values. This is perhaps the most sensitive of the 7 decisions we will examine today, and I want to be very clear up front. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the most deeply complex geopolitical situations in the modern world. There are genuine security concerns on multiple sides. There are historical grievances that go back generations. Reasonable, thoughtful people disagree strongly about the right approach. What this analysis focuses on is not who is right and who is wrong in that conflict, because that is a debate far larger than any single video. What it focuses on is a specific question of American leadership and values projection. United Nations agencies, international medical organizations, and independent humanitarian observers have documented severe conditions in Gaza throughout this period. The scale of civilian suffering, whatever one's views on its causes or the responsibilities of various parties, has been widely reported and is not seriously disputed by credible observers. The question that analysts raise is this: how a superpower chooses to engage with such a documented humanitarian crisis speaks directly to its stated values. United States has historically positioned itself as a champion of human rights and democratic norms globally. When the gap between stated values and visible policy choices becomes large, when allies and international observers point to that gap repeatedly, the soft power of the United States, its moral authority and global credibility, takes a measurable hit. Former diplomats and international relations scholars across the political spectrum have written about this dynamic. The conclusion most share is not partisan, it is analytical. America's global leadership depends not only on military and economic strength, but on the perceived consistency between what it says and what it does. That gap, critics argue, widened during this period, and the consequences for American influence are still being measured. Decision 3. The domestic promise, when MAGA voters started asking, when? Make America great again. Those 4 words represented something genuinely powerful, not just a political slogan. For millions of working-class Americans across the industrial heartland in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, it was a direct address, a promise that someone in Washington finally understood what they were going through. The economic anxiety was real. Decades of manufacturing decline, communities hollowed out by global trade shifts. healthcare costs that could bankrupt a family despite doing everything right, infrastructure crumbling quietly but visibly. In the early months of the administration, analysts note there were legitimate positive signals on several domestic economic indicators. Certain trade renegotiations were showing promise. Energy production was increasing. Some manufacturing metrics were moving in favorable directions. Then, foreign policy and military engagement consumed an enormous amount of the administration's political energy, public attention, and eventually, financial resources. Policy analysts have examined what economists call the opportunity cost of major military engagements. The spending, the political bandwidth, the market uncertainty, all of it represents resources that cannot simultaneously be directed at domestic priorities. The voters who believed most passionately in the MAGA vision, the factory workers, the farmers, the veterans, began asking questions that showed up clearly in polling data. When does the domestic rebuilding actually begin? When do my energy bills go down? When does my paycheck go further? The promise that energized a movement was at risk of becoming, for many of its original believers, an unfulfilled aspiration. And here is where I turn to you, wherever you are watching this from. Has a leader in your country ever campaigned on a powerful domestic promise and then allowed external events or foreign commitments to swallow that promise before it was fulfilled? Comment below. Your experience matters here. Decision 4. The economic warning. What energy analysts say about conflict and cost of living. Let me introduce you to a woman I'll call Sarah. A composite portrait drawn from dozens of real stories reported by major news outlets across America in recent months. Sarah is a retired teacher in the American Midwest. She spent 32 years in a classroom. She saved carefully. She has a modest retirement account. She owns a small home. She drives to the grocery store twice a week. In early 2026, Sarah sat at her kitchen table looking at two things: her retirement account statement and her gas station receipt. Both told the same story. Things cost more than they used to, and her savings were worth less than they had been. Here is the economic analysis behind Sarah's experience, stripped of all spin, drawing on publicly available expert commentary. Energy economists and geopolitical analysts have long warned about the structural vulnerability of global oil markets to Middle East instability. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway through which approximately 20% of globally traded oil passes, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, represents a critical choke point. When regional military tensions rise significantly, oil futures markets react immediately and dramatically. Analysts at major financial institutions and energy research firms have modeled what sustained conflict in or near that region would likely mean for global oil prices. Their projections, based on historical precedents from previous Gulf conflicts, consistently show significant upward pressure on crude prices. The knock-on effects for ordinary Americans are well documented. Higher gas prices, increased transportation costs feeding into the price of all consumer goods, elevated inflation, and increased market volatility affecting retirement accounts and investment portfolios. Economic analysts have noted, across the political spectrum, that the combination of heightened Middle East military engagement and domestic energy policy uncertainty creates exactly the kind of market environment that is most damaging for working and middle-class families. The historical precedent is clear: the 1973 oil embargo, the 1990 Gulf War spike, the 2003 Iraq invasion. In each case, military engagement in energy-producing regions produced predictable and significant economic consequences for ordinary Americans. Sarah's kitchen table math is not abstract economics. It is the human face of geopolitical decisions. And the analyst's question is a direct one. Was this outcome foreseeable? And if it was foreseeable, was it avoidable? Decision 5. The alliance fracture. Going it alone when the world was watching.
There is an old military principle, older than any modern nation-state, that coalition strength multiplies capability while sharing cost and risk. In World War II, America did not defeat fascism alone. The alliance of nations, each contributing different capabilities, legitimacy, and resources, created a force that no single nation could have assembled independently. In the Gulf War of 1990, President George H.W. Bush assembled one of the largest international coalitions in modern history before moving militarily. The result was swift, internationally legitimate, and cost-shared in ways that significantly reduced the burden on American taxpayers and military resources. Foreign policy analysts who have examined the current administration's approach to Middle East engagement have raised consistent concerns about what several describe as unilateral instinct, a pattern of action that sidelines consultation with key allies. European NATO allies publicly expressed frustration about being informed rather than consulted on key decisions. Gulf state partners, whose regional stability is directly affected by any escalation, have sent mixed signals, ranging from cautious concern to quiet alarm. The consequences of alliance erosion are not just emotional, they are practical and strategic. When America needs international support for maritime security operations, for sanctions regimes, for intelligence sharing, that support depends on the goodwill and trust built through consistent alliance management. That trust, multiple former ambassadors and foreign policy analysts have noted in public commentary, is significantly more difficult to rebuild than it is to lose. Decision 6. The home front. The Americans who needed investment, not just attention. Let us talk about numbers that do not make headlines, but that define the daily reality of millions of American lives. According to the U.S. Census Bureau's most recent poverty data, approximately 37 to 40 million Americans live below the federal poverty line. The American Society of Civil Engineers has given American infrastructure an overall grade of C-, with bridges, roads, drinking water systems, and the electrical grid all showing significant deterioration. The United States spends more on healthcare per capita than any other developed nation, and yet ranks poorly on key health outcomes, including life expectancy, when compared to peer nations. American student debt has passed $1.7 trillion. Affordable housing is in a crisis in virtually every major metropolitan area. These are not partisan statistics. These are documented realities that affect American families regardless of how they vote. Economists use a concept called guns versus butter, a metaphor as old as modern economics itself, to describe the fundamental trade-off that every government faces between military spending and domestic investment. The resources are finite. A dollar directed toward one priority is a dollar unavailable for another. Policy analysts from both conservative and progressive institutions have noted that the cost, in political bandwidth, financial resources, and public attention, of sustained foreign military engagement makes meaningful progress on domestic priorities exponentially harder. The vision of a rebuilt America, world-class infrastructure, affordable healthcare, strong schools, clean energy, is not impossible, but it requires sustained, focused domestic investment. And sustained, focused domestic investment requires a leadership environment where foreign crises are not consuming the oxygen in the room. Wherever you are watching this right now, are the domestic challenges in your country being ignored while your government focuses outward? Let me know in the comments. This is a pattern that plays out in country after country, decade after decade. Decision 7. The legacy decision. What history will actually remember? And now we arrive at the 7th decision. The quiet one. The one underneath all the noise. The decision about legacy. Every significant leader, at some point in their tenure, faces a defining fork in the road. Not a policy decision, not a legislative fight, but a deeper choice. What kind of leader do I want history to remember me as?
Consider the historical parallels carefully. Richard Nixon opened diplomatic relations with China in 1972, a move that shocked the world and that his ideological opponents said was impossible. Nixon, the staunch anti-communist, sitting across from Mao Zedong. It was audacious, it was unconventional, and it fundamentally reshaped global geopolitics in ways that are still felt today. Whatever else history says about Nixon, that moment is carved in stone as a genuine achievement of strategic genius. Jimmy Carter, at Camp David in 1978, refused to give up on an agreement between Egyptian President Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Begin that seemed dead multiple times. He kept both leaders at the negotiating table for 13 days. The result, the Camp David Accords, was the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab nation. Carter won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 in large part for a lifetime of peacemaking that began there. The historical what-if that analysts keep returning to is this. Donald Trump had political assets that made him uniquely positioned for a moment like this. He was not seen as an establishment figure. He had demonstrated willingness to engage with leaders that conventional diplomacy had avoided. He had personal relationships with key regional players. He had the credibility with his own base to make a deal that no Democrat could have made without being accused of weakness. The window for a genuine historic diplomatic breakthrough, one that could have defined his legacy in ways that no amount of domestic policy achievement ever could, was potentially open. And the seventh decision, the legacy decision, was the choice of how to respond to that window. Historians will debate for decades whether that window was real, how wide it was, and whether walking through it was genuinely possible. But the debate itself tells you something important. The possibility existed, the moment existed, and the choice was made. Leadership is always a choice, and the choices that define a leader's place in history are rarely the ones they planned. They're the ones they make when the window appears, and they have only a moment to decide whether to open it or walk past it. We began this story with a simple image. A man walking into the most powerful office on earth. A promise made. A world watching. And we have examined, honestly and without partisan agenda, 7 decisions that analysts say carried significant costs. Costs measured in diplomatic capital, in economic impact, in unrealized potential, in a legacy that might have looked very different. But here is the truth that transcends any single leader, any single country, any single moment in history. Power does not care who holds it. It only cares what is done with it. The retired teacher watching her savings, the family paying more at the pump, the diplomat in a European capital wondering whether the alliance still holds, the young person in a conflict zone wondering whether anyone in Washington sees them as a human being. These are not abstractions. These are the real human consequences of decisions made at the top. Decisions made by people who will be remembered in history books, while the people they affect will mostly be remembered only by those who loved them. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one." For leaders, perhaps the parallel is this. Waste no more time arguing about what a great leader should do. Do it. The window is always open, until it is not. So I leave you with the question I began with, now perhaps carrying more weight than it did at the start. If you held that kind of power, what would your 7 decisions be? Write it in the comments. I read every single one, and I mean that. If this analysis made you think, if it sparked a question or challenged an assumption, or confirmed something you felt but couldn't quite articulate, then you are exactly who Capture Smart was built for. Every week, this channel takes the stories that matter, the political, the historical, the deeply human, and tells them with the honesty and depth they deserve. Subscribe right now, hit the notification bell, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because the next story we tell, it might be the one that changes how you see the world. Until then, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and we will see you in the next story.